So I had the privilege I've actually, over the last several years, I've had the privilege to tour Denmark several times with, believe it or not, 36 Washington state legislators over that time, and 18 of them have been Democrats, and 18 of them have been Republicans, which you'd think would be recipe for disaster and, eye gouging and kneecapping, all kinds of terrors. But they have actually built up a real respect and rapport. These are some of the most incredible public servants that I've ever met. We often think of politicians as underhanded, dirty, slime bags or whatever, but these are actually authentic public servants that like Representative Chapman is an extraordinary leader who really cares about the people in his district profoundly and is looking to do things for them. And what they saw in Denmark was very inspiring, especially this esoteric idea of industrial symbiosis. And particularly this last time, Randy, Ted, you joined our delegation, the agriculture symbiosis delegation, emphasis on agriculture applications of industrial symbiosis. And when we visited GreenLab, everyone was especially inspired. And we wanted to come back and maybe bring that model back to some key communities in Washington state, like Pasco, like Longview that you represent. And so we've been hard at work at that, and GreenLab's been very helpful. But Niels, we hear a lot about the OG in industrial symbiosis, Kalundborg Symbiosis, which started 50 years ago and has morphed and evolved and just extraordinary, amazing. You guys started an industrial symbiosis park, and I think of you as been in the building phase of the last 5 years, basically, and deployed $450 million or so US on several industrial facilities linked by symbiosis infrastructure. But how do you guys think about industrial symbiosis? How are you approaching it at GreenLab? Can you speak to that?
Yes, and thank you for having me here. It's really a great honor to be here among so many interesting and inspiring people. I represent GreenLab, and we are an industrial cluster, and contrary to the Kalundborg cluster, we have been built from a greenfield project. So the municipality actually started it as a project roughly 10 years back, but quite early in the process got a dedicated organization to start building it up. If you take just a step back first, then we have a very large degree of intermittent power in our electricity mix in Denmark. And that comes with quite some challenges, both in terms of technical and financials. But industrial clusters are one solution to mitigate those, especially the time shifting and the place shifting issues is something that we in GreenLab try to find solutions for. And building an industrial cluster is absolutely not linear. It's quite an iterative process, and I would actually argue that it's kind of like entering into this big maze where there's a lot of walls, and each wall can represent a challenge. That could be local regulation, it could be baseload capacity, capacity factors, endangered species, all types of challenges that infrastructure projects need to overcome. But then when you navigate through this maze of challenges and try to find the way out which could represent a fully functional cluster, then these walls suddenly start to change, and challenges that you thought had overcome suddenly reappear. And that is kind of a wicked space to be situated in. And to add to that, then you also encounter the opportunity suppression, because when you have a solution to do something, if you choose solution A today, then you're not able to do solution B or C tomorrow, right? And adding to that, that's a constant dilemma of doing something versus doing the right thing, because whatever you choose today will most likely end up being not favorable or even a wrong decision when we fast forward 10 years into the future. So that does require a certain mindset and capabilities in doing so. And that's why I think the performance machine versus the innovation teams comes quite much into play, because having a dedicated organization to drive the daily operation of a company. They are very skilled people in doing optimizations, issues, etc. for the daily operation. But they are bound by various KPIs, are probably not the ones best suited to take on an innovative task of developing a cluster. That's where the innovation team comes in. But it does come with quite some frustrations as well, and we are absolutely not perfect and have also done various mistakes along the way, but that's where we really appreciate the collaboration that we have with you guys, and hope that we can pass on some of those learnings. We are not able to go out, we do not have neither the financial or the organizational capability today to go out and replicate it. But we hope to inspire and to advise and support others in their efforts in doing new clusters.
Great, Niels. And Randy Hayden, Executive Director of the Port of Pasco, what did you, maybe speak to, Pasco boasts, I think, certainly Washington State's biggest industrial symbiosis project, probably the nation's, perhaps, at the Pasco Industrial Wastewater Reuse Facility, and is aspiring to build an even more innovative Pasco Industrial Symbiosis Park of sorts. Can you speak to Pasco and the leadership and the vision that you have?
For sure. In Pasco, just for those who aren't familiar, is Southeast Washington. We're located at the confluence of the Columbia Snake River, so lots of ag production going on there, lots of ag growth. So the city of Pasco works with food processors, and they take their wastewater, and then they do some basic level of treatment and spray it over farmland. But to really keep up with the growth, they've had to implement new technology, and they'll be taking wastewater from food processors, putting in a digester to capture renewable natural gas, and then using some new, very innovative rotating algae drums to take out nitrogen, which is one of the contaminants that we have there. And then that algae is hoped that we can use that for fertilizer that will go back on other fields. So just that perfect example of using a waste resource, turning it into a profit center.
That's great. And when you visited GreenLab, what was it that you saw at GreenLab that kind of inspired you to say, you know what, there's more that we could do in Pasco?
Yeah, I think the very inspiring thing about GreenLabs is how selective they were about the types of industries that are located at this industrial park. It's not just whoever wants to be there can come. You have to have a very specific piece of the puzzle that you fit into so that your waste resource can go in to feed the next industry that's there. So that model of being just that matchmaking model, I think, was something that I learned. And I also very much appreciate the GreenLabs talks openly about the things that haven't worked, the things that they're still working on, because it's not an easy process to get the right industries to make this all work together. Talking about the city's wastewater plant again, when they were looking at these rotating algae drums for nitrogen, it's a new technology. The food processors that are out there initially were not, and to some degree are still not very excited about it, because they're wondering, is this really going to work? We've got to get our frozen vegetables, our French fries out to their market. If your plant is shut down, we're shut down. So being innovative also comes with that risk that the private industry really has to buy into.
Great, thanks, Randy. And Ted, Longview, extraordinary industrial leadership for the last 50 years. Can you speak a little bit about Longview's industrial history and kind of the pivot point that we're at as we look toward the next 50 years, and how this sort of GreenLab approach might fit within that? Industrial symbiosis might be part of the story.
Yeah. We are located about 40 minutes north of Portland, Oregon, right along the crest of the Columbia River. And when I was at GreenLab, I can just tell you, I was looking around, and all I could think about was our former aluminum smelter that is going through a $35 million environmental cleanup that will level a site for us to have approximately 500 acres for new industrial development. And I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna do everything that GreenLab did besides the mistakes. And you know, learn from my colleagues in Denmark, because they've been so welcoming and your country is so wonderful and the people were so great. So we're really interested in becoming a model not only for Washington State, but for the United States on how this type of innovative industrial development can be utilized throughout our country. And so we're really excited about it.
And Randy and Ted, you guys organized workshops. We toured Denmark in September of 2023, and in early December, we brought 2 senior leaders from GreenLab to Pasco and to Longview, and you each convened kind of a who's who of the industrial leaders, the civic leaders, the utility leaders, everybody who was really important to join a half-day workshop with GreenLab. Can you speak to people's experience of that? Because they didn't tour Denmark with us necessarily, and so this is kind of coming out of, not left field, but across the pond, and suddenly being exposed to this. How did that go over, that workshop?
Yeah. I was also curious how it would go over. I mean, we're working with farmers, and we're working with large-scale ag producers. I was actually very surprised at the reception that we got, because even down to the farmer in the field, sustainability is a driving requirement that they are having to comply with, and they have a chance to make some money because of the programs that are out there that are paying people to be sustainable. So people, surprisingly to me, came with more open minds than I expected them to. Particularly on our large food processors, they would like to follow up and see how we can begin implementing some of the industrial symbiosis principles, and is there a spot where we could plug them in so that their expansions and their new facilities could take advantage of that.
Yeah, I was overwhelmed with our seminar. We had about 35 community leaders there, some companies as large as 2,000 employees, all the way down to 10, 15 employees. But what I really learned was we have about an 8-mile industrial corridor. Our county is the largest industrial employment county in Western Washington, and so we have a lot of industry. And what I learned was there's a lot of industrial symbiosis going on currently that people just don't talk about. And it's like, but what everybody saw from GreenLab is we need to get together, and we need to get together quarterly, and we need to figure this out, and we want to partner. And I was really inspired by it. And so we're starting to convene those smaller groups now to see what's going on currently and what we could bring in specifically to fit into the puzzle in this new, brand new industrial acreage site we have.
Niels, can you speak to the GreenLab model, the Kalundborg Symbiosis model? This is large scale, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars are being deployed in big infrastructure, knitting together large productive facilities that have imperatives of cost, of delivering product. Nothing can go wrong, or it's very disruptive. Do you have any advice for us as we look to GreenLab and look to Denmark as our model, as the experts who've developed this over the last 20 years, developed the expertise? What are some of the best practices as we move to implement and replicate your model that we should be thinking about?
It's a good question. 2 things, I think. First of all, the contextual environment is extremely important. So one model doesn't fit them all. Oh, sorry about that. Meaning also we wouldn't be able to go out and replicate our own site. It wouldn't simply make sense to bring the exact same companies to another location. It really very much depends on the local situation and that environment and the local stakeholder, etc. The second one, that's where we have from experience learned that there are 2 really key questions that needs to be answered quite early in the process. And one being, who's the one driving it? Who's the one owning it? Which person, organization, company is the one really driving it? And secondly, and even as important, is who is going to take on the risk? And if those 2 questions are not answered quite early in the process, there's a very, very high likelihood that the project is going to fail later on in the process, exactly due to those 2 reasons.
And one thing that's really striking from my perspective when we go to Denmark and tour some of these places is that Whereas in the US, we tend to have siloed utilities. So utilities are fantastic inventions that can finance capital investments that can serve multiple entities. They can finance it over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, take on that risk, handle that, build the expertise to deliver the resource, whatever the service is. Great institutions, but we tend to have them siloed. An electric utility is separate from a water utility, is separate from a wastewater utility, separate from the waste management utility, et cetera. Whereas in Denmark, often these are knitted together under one rubric and managed in an integrated way strategically to optimize the investments and optimize the costs and benefits. Is that what you mean? Is that what we sort of need, a multi-utility model to at least on an industrial park scale, to facilitate these kind of GreenLab type projects? Do we need to overcome that siloization of utilities? Are utilities the right entities to drive these, or nonprofits, or?
I think it can be a solution, but I don't think by far it's the only solution, because it doesn't work like that everywhere in Denmark. It's absolutely true that it is possible for some utilities to have a very broad scope. What really has worked for us is that we were an organization who could drive the project and could take on the risk taking. And that was due to our large investments coming from a utility in Denmark, but really giving the mandate to the GreenLab organization to take on the scope of investing in various infrastructure projects within our premise. And that is where that it really had worked, because many of these systems that we have set up to play, they wouldn't have been realized if it was company A and company B collaborating on it, because their what is called depreciation timeline for their investments would have been way too short, 2, 3, maybe 5 years if we were lucky. But there are very many of these investments that needs to take on a much longer depreciation timeline, 15 or even maybe even longer timelines. And that is where the dedicated organization able to take on these investments comes into play.
How are you structured? Is it a nonprofit structure, or are you a company, a for-profit company, or?
It's a non-for-profit company, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Randy and Ted, what questions would you want to ask Niels as we look to GreenLab as an inspiration and a model, and hopefully as an entity that can export some of that expertise to help us here in Washington State replicate? You got a question for?
Well,
Niels?
I don't think we've been shy in asking along the way, so I'm not going to put you on the spot here today. I just really appreciate your group's openness to our questions, because we are going to stumble along at the beginning, absolutely, and so any guidance that you guys can provide along the way, we really do appreciate.
We still stumble.
I'll throw out a question.
I do want to say...
You deferred, so the debate is on.
Go ahead.
Your chance is gone.
You're right.
We have 1 minute left.
You're right.
We're used to, in economic development worlds, going out looking for the types of companies we want and saying, hey, look what we've got. But here you've got to find the right company. So how do you manage that? Let's get the right company, but how do you get them to want to be at GreenLabs?
And that's a really good question. If you got the right answer, then please call me. It is a challenge. And we don't have the luxury of every company in the world aiming to come to GreenLab, unfortunately. We do have a lot of companies who would like to be part of the cluster that we also turn down, because it needs to fit into the environment. We need to, every company coming in, we assess them as both the current situation, what they bring, but also what we expect of developments within the industrial park in the future. And that is really an iterative process. So every time we take in a new company into the park, well, the picture more or less changes completely. So we have a large data set with various point sources of in and output of resources, etc. And those needs to be reassessed every time a new company potentially comes in.
My question that I missed out on asking is, I want to know who has contacts at Lego that I could talk to about locating, like the ambassador said. Thank you.
Benedicta, you've got that? All right, Yes, we'll connect you. Okay, Ted and Randy, Washington State is so blessed to have forward-leaning visionaries leading in our communities around industrial symbiosis like you guys. I can't thank you enough for your leadership. Niels, thank you for taking the trip all the way across the pond to join us here. I hope it's not your last trip over here. I hope you come and can help us as we grow these incredible projects. So thanks to our panel very much.
Great job.